A short, partial answer to the clickbait question in the thumbnail is that it has to do with technique. Sure, there's all sorts of stuff about how technical death metal songs are put together that's all twisty, that makes them hard to play, etc. But there's also a pretty specific grab bag of instrumental techniques that is integral to the sound of the subgenre. I'm going to talk about 3 guitar techniques, which all show up in Origin's presciently plague-themed The Aftermath, and along the way talk about how Origin's use of these techniques is unusual and cool. Antithesis was the first death metal album that I really liked, and The Aftermath was the first death metal song that I learned to play front to back on guitar. In retrospect, it was great because it was like a primer for all these metal guitar techniques. The first technique it forced me to master was tremolo picking. This is just picking the same note really fast. While there's a lot of fast picking in metal, I draw a distinction between fast picking that's rhythmic, i.e. that fits onto a 16th note or whatever type of grid, and tremolo picking, which is so fast that it becomes a timbral effect rather than a rhythmic one. That's what Origin does. It gives the guitar notes a buzzy sound to match the frenetic, constant motion of the drums. When I play this, the speed of my picking hand forces me to zoom out my rhythmic hearing. I kind of automate my right hand to move as fast as it can without reference to the beat, while my left hand has to hear with the slower beat. This is an effect of a lot of Origin's music. The riff structures are often not that dense, but they use these techniques to saturate the rhythmic surface. The same thing is true for the next technique. When I was learning these, I called them triangles because of the shape they make on the fretboard, but if anyone has a better name for them, let me know. Basically, they're a fast bottom string figuration pattern used to flesh out a simple melody on the 4th string. Kind of an Origin-specific version of a more common thing in a lot of metal, the compound melody / pedal point string skipping thing, where you fill in a melody on one of the upper strings with palm muted chugs on a lower string. The Origin version, instead of just playing a single pitch in the lower voice, outlines a major 6th down and then an octave down, and then back to the major 6th down before going back to the melody. So it kind of gives a partial minor triad that just moves around in parallel with the upper voice. Again, the melody is not too complicated, but it's filled out so that there's a guitar attack on every 16th note. When I first learned this song, I couldn't believe they were actually playing all these notes because they get kind of buried in the texture. But I think that's kind of the point with this and all of these techniques for Origin. It's not necessarily about the notes so much, I think, but about filling out the texture and the rhythmic space and giving it a specific timbral feel. Finally, the moment we've all been waiting for. Learning guitar as a metalhead in the 2000s, sweep picking felt like this big rite of passage. I prioritized learning it above like everything else, and no band made me want to do this more than Origin. Sweep picking is a technique for playing fast arpeggios on the guitar. A lot of bands use them to outline pretty cool standard chord progressions where it's clear that what matters is the notes in them and the voice leading between them. You know, standard harmony stuff. Origin takes the technique in a kind of different direction, where the roles of the individual notes sort of seem to break down. And as it turns out, when they're happening this fast with this much distortion, they do break down on a micro level. Here's me playing some at full speed, but the video is slowed down a bunch. See how there are all these little gaps in the notes? just to show that it's not entirely because I'm bad at guitar, here's a slowed version of the same bit from the actual recording. I'm not doing this to nitpick technique or anything. I'm doing it to point out that what's important is not so much the individual notes, but the gesture as a whole. Because origin sweeps are so fast and played with a ton of distortion through the neck pickup, they have a very specific sound. They become something more than notes. Instead, they're kind of a timbre thing, a specific tech death bubbling laser gun sound object that's different from the sum of its parts. Theme of this video is that these specific guitar techniques play a big role in Origin's music. In the Aftermath, in particular, almost every single riff uses one of these. They rearrange them and move them up and down the fretboard, but they mostly leave the techniques intact, using them as the basic building blocks for the riffs. I find this not only makes their music very fun to play, because you get to play a lot of notes very fast without having to memorize a ton of new patterns, but it also makes it sound super blocky and brutal. The other cool thing about Origin's use of these techniques is that they kind of strain against the tacit assumption in a lot of music theory that what we're dealing with are notes and positions on a rhythmic grid. The pedal point thing stays on the rhythmic grid, but the sweeps and tremolo picking blur this grid. And all of them kind of happen so fast that they have these cool resultant timbral qualities that I think are just as important as playing lots of notes fast. They're taken to such an extreme that they transcend their role as just notes and become something else. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you're new to this part of towns, please scrub-a-dub-dub-scribe and do all that other stuff too, maybe. Hail space, see ya.